The night air held its breath the way it does before a storm, thick with dust and promise, when Tala stood at the door of a small wooden room that was meant to be hers now. The lamp inside burned low, its flame trembling like it knew something the heart did not want to learn yet. Outside, the land stretched wide and quiet, fields fading into dark, a kind of silence that belonged to old America, where every promise was spoken plain and every hurt was carried deep. Tala had crossed a long road to reach this night of marriage, believing that a new name and a shared roof could turn loneliness into belonging. She had believed that vows spoken before witnesses could anchor a drifting soul. She had learned early that hope often wears a simple face. Raised among people who spoke little and worked hard, Tala knew how to read the land and the weather, how to mend cloth and calm a restless horse, how to swallow words when speaking would bring no good. Her mother had told her that marriage was a doorway, not a finish line, and that the first night mattered not for what happened, but for what it revealed. Tala had laughed then, young and certain that love, once chosen, stayed chosen. Now, with the door half open and the lamp flickering, she remembered those words with a tightness in her chest. He had been kind in the ways that counted on the surface. A steady hand, a quiet voice, a man known in town as honest and fair. Folks said she was lucky, and she nodded because luck is a thing people like to see. The wedding had been small, the kind of gathering where boots scuff the floor and food is shared without fuss. There had been smiles and nods, a hymn hummed under breath, and a preacher who spoke of duty and devotion as if they were as sure as sunrise. Tala had stood straight, her hands folded, her heart beating a little too fast but still full of faith. When the last guest left and the stars came out sharp and clear, Tala stepped into the room that would hold her new life. The boards creaked under her shoes, familiar sounds that should have comforted her. She set down her bundle, smoothed her dress, and waited. Waiting had never frightened her. She had waited through droughts and winters, through letters that came late and answers that never did. Waiting was a skill she owned. He came in quietly, closing the door behind him. The lamp threw his shadow against the wall, stretching it longer than the man himself. Tala turned, ready to greet him with the careful warmth she had practiced in her mind. She wanted to begin well, to set the tone for a marriage built on respect and patience. The words she had saved rose to her lips and then fell away, because his eyes did not meet hers. He stood there, hat in hand, as if unsure where to place himself. The room felt smaller, the air tighter. Tala felt the first stir of unease, a whisper of something wrong that brushed her skin like a cold breeze. She told herself that nerves were natural, that the first night of marriage carried weight for any man and woman. She took a step closer, her voice soft, asking if he was all right. He looked at her then, and the look held sorrow more than fear. What came next did not arrive as a shout or a blow. It came as words, spoken low, words meant to spare, and yet sharp enough to cut. He said her name, and in the way he said it, she heard distance. He said he had to leave. Not for long, he said, just for the night. He said it would be better this way. He said things he thought would soften the truth, whispers meant to be kind, but they struck deeper than any pain Tala had known. She did not cry at first. Tears belong to moments that have shape, and this one had none. It was a sudden hollow, a space where warmth should have been. Tala asked why, her voice steady because her body remembered how to stand firm. He did not answer her question. He spoke around it, talking of matters to settle, of burdens he carried, of a past that had not loosened its grip. Each word was a stone dropped into her chest. As he turned to go, Tala reached out, not to stop him, but to touch something real, to confirm that this was happening. Her fingers brushed his sleeve, and he stiffened, then gentled, as if the contact reminded him of the promise he was breaking. He paused, leaned close enough that she could feel his breath, and whispered something meant only for her. It was a plea and an apology tangled together, a sentence that made sense in his mind and none in hers. Then he was gone, the door closing with a sound that echoed too loud in the small room. Tala stood alone, the lamp still burning, the bed untouched. The first night of marriage had ended before it began, not with anger or betrayal as stories often tell, but with absence. Absence can be heavier than presence. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded in her lap, and listened to the night outside. Somewhere a coyote called. Somewhere else, a train whistle carried across the plains, a sound of leaving and never looking back. She thought of the vows she had spoken, plain and honest. She thought of the life she had agreed to build, the work and the quiet joy she had expected to share. She wondered what kind of marriage begins with a closed door and unanswered questions. In old America, people did not speak easily of heart matters. They carried them like tools, using them when needed and setting them down when they hurt too much. Tala had learned that way. Still, she felt something shift inside her, a line crossed without her consent. Morning would come as it always did, and with it the eyes of neighbors and the weight of rumor. Tala knew the rules. She would keep her head high, her words few. She would protect what little dignity she had left, because dignity, once lost, is hard to find again. Yet beneath that resolve, doubt stirred. Was this a test, as her mother had once suggested, or a warning she should not ignore? The whispers he left her with repeated in her mind, each one pressing on a tender place. They were not cruel words, and that was what made them dangerous. They sounded reasonable, almost noble. They asked for patience, for understanding, for time. Tala had given all those things before, to seasons and people that never returned the favor. She wondered how much patience a heart could hold before it learned to close. As the lamp guttered and went dark, Tala lay back without undressing, staring at the ceiling she could no longer see. The room smelled of fresh wood and oil, of a future that had slipped its leash. She told herself she would sleep, that rest would bring clarity. Instead, she listened to every sound, waiting for footsteps that did not come. Outside, the land kept its secrets. Inside, Tala faced a marriage defined by a single night and a question that would not rest. Why do you leave me the first night of marriage, with whispers that cut so deep? The answer waited somewhere beyond the door, and whether it would heal or break her was a truth still walking toward her in the dark. The morning sun crept across the wooden floors, pale and hesitant, as if it too sensed the weight of the night before. Tala woke to the quiet of an empty house, the smell of cold ash from the lamp mingling with the lingering scent of horses and dust from outside. Her eyes traced the walls she had just begun to call her own, and for a moment she allowed herself to imagine a life here, with work and laughter and small comforts. But the memory of his absence, of his whispered words, lingered heavier than the dawn light. She rose slowly, her bare feet brushing against the worn floorboards, and moved to the window. Beyond it, the world stretched out endless and unforgiving. Fields rolled toward a distant horizon where the sky met the land in a hard, bright line. A fence post cast a long shadow over the dust, and somewhere a crow's caw broke the silence. Tala's hands tightened on the window frame, knuckles white. She had questions that could not wait, questions that would not leave her alone. She had to know why he had left, why the first night, meant to be a beginning, had been an ending instead. Her thoughts drifted back, as they often did, to her life before this house, before this marriage. She had grown up in a small settlement by the river, where people spoke little and measured everything by the rhythm of the seasons. Her father had been a man of few words, but his hands had told stories in wood and iron, in plowed fields and repaired fences. Her mother had spoken more, but her words were careful, wrapped in caution and old wisdom. Tala had learned to listen before she spoke, to weigh each step as if the ground itself could betray her if she moved too quickly. She remembered the afternoons by the riverbank, the sunlight dancing on water and whispering secrets she could almost understand. Back then, love was something distant, like the horizon she had watched for hours. Marriage was a promise spoken aloud, but in her world, promises were fragile and tested by circumstance. And yet, when she had met him, she had felt a spark of something undeniable. Not the dramatic pull of stories told in town, but a quiet certainty. A sense that this man understood the value of patience and work, that he had learned the same lessons the land had taught her. People had noticed it too, how he lingered on the edges of her life, how his voice softened when he spoke her name. There had been smiles, small gestures, the exchange of glances that seemed to say more than any words could capture. Tala had hoped that when the time came, when the house was shared and the nights belonged to them both, things would unfold naturally, gently. But she had not counted on secrets carried quietly, heavy as stones, that could undo everything in a single whisper. Her mind wandered to the journey they had made together to reach this home. The wagon had creaked under their weight, the horses straining as they moved across fields and hills that seemed endless. He had driven carefully, often glancing back at her with a softness she had not expected from a man so reserved. Nights on the trail had been calm, the stars clear and bright above them, the air crisp and carrying the smell of pine and earth. She had thought those nights would prepare her for this one, for the quiet intimacy of a shared life. Instead, the room they had entered together had swallowed that expectation whole. Tala moved through the small house, touching the wooden surfaces as if the walls themselves could offer answers. The kitchen table bore scratches from generations past, the chairs uneven and worn, the hearth still holding the faint warmth of a fire that had not fully died. She tried to imagine him returning, explaining, apologizing, but the space felt impossibly vast without him. She could feel his absence in every corner, in the shadow of the door, in the chill that seeped from the floorboards. As she prepared a small breakfast, Tala's thoughts wandered to the town they had left behind. People there had spoken in whispers and knowing glances about men and women who did not follow the expected path, who carried burdens they could not speak of aloud. Some had whispered about his past carefully, as if a wrong word might summon trouble. Tala had heard the rumors but had dismissed them. A man's past, she had reasoned, does not always dictate his present. But now, alone in the silence, those whispers returned, insistent and knowing. Was it something in his past that had made him leave? Something he could not share even with her? Her hands trembled slightly as she set down the wooden cup of water. The air outside shifted, a breeze sweeping dust along the ground, rustling the edges of the shutters. Tala felt the house breathe with her, carrying its own tension, its own anticipation. She remembered the stories her mother had told her, old tales of hearts tested by absence, of promises made under pressure and broken by circumstance. The world she had grown up in had no room for soft illusions. Life demanded endurance, and Tala was learning that lesson again, harsher than she had expected. She decided she could not wait in one place, could not let the day pass without attempting to understand. She dressed in her plain clothes, fastening buttons carefully, and stepped outside into the brightness. The wind carried the smell of hay and earth, and for a moment she let herself breathe it in, trying to anchor herself to something familiar. She thought of the road he had taken, the direction of the town he might return to, the places he might be keeping from her. Each thought was a thread, pulling her mind taut with the need to unravel the mystery before it consumed her completely. Tala's mind returned to the night before, to the words he had whispered. She tried to replay them, to find a hidden meaning, a clue she had missed. He had not been cruel, not in the way some men could be, but the absence he left was sharp, defined by what he did not say. She realized that sometimes the loudest pain is carried silently, in the spaces between words and gestures half made, in promises deferred. The idea that he might have reasons she could not yet understand both terrified and compelled her. She had always believed that understanding could bridge gaps, could heal wounds, but the weight of his silence challenged that belief. As the sun climbed higher, casting long lines of shadow across the fields, Tala began to think of what she would do next. Could she follow him? Should she confront the past that had driven him away? Her instincts, honed by years of observation and quiet endurance, told her to prepare, to plan, to move with caution, but her heart pressed for immediacy, demanded action. That tension between reason and longing made her steps uncertain as she walked toward the barn, the place where the horses waited and the world seemed to stretch beyond immediate understanding. The land itself seemed to conspire with her emotions, every gust of wind carrying questions, every distant sound sharpening her awareness. Tala knew she would not find answers quickly. Some truths were slow, patient as the river that cut through the valley. Others were sharp and sudden, appearing when least expected. She felt caught between these possibilities, suspended in a space where curiosity collided with fear. The day ahead promised movement, confrontation, and the revelation of secrets that had been kept too long. And yet, even as she prepared herself to seek him, Tala could not shake the whispers that still echoed in her mind. They were not merely words, but a weight, a challenge, a warning. Why did he leave her the first night of marriage, with words that hurt more than absence itself? She did not know, and the unknown both frightened her and compelled her forward. The house behind her, the road ahead, the field stretching toward a horizon she could not yet see all of it, carried the tension of unanswered questions. Tala paused, hand on the gate, listening to the wind and the distant call of a bird. Her breath caught as she considered the journey ahead, the need to confront not only him, but whatever truths he carried hidden. The first night had changed everything, but it had not broken her. It had only begun a story that would unfold slowly, painfully, and with the promise of discovery. Somewhere beyond the hills, somewhere beyond the whispered absences, lay answers she had to reach, even if they were not ready to reveal themselves. The morning sun continued its climb, indifferent to her urgency, indifferent to the questions that pressed at her chest. Tala stepped forward, the dust rising under her boots, carrying with it the weight of a heart that refused to remain silent. The first night of marriage had ended in a question, and the answer, elusive and heavy, waited somewhere on the horizon. Every step she took was a step into uncertainty, into the story that had only just begun, a story of whispers, absence, and the fragile promise of understanding that could change everything or leave her standing alone once more. Tala rode along the dusty trail, the horse's hooves stirring small clouds of earth that clung to her boots and skirts. Every rhythm of the animal beneath her seemed to echo the tension in her chest, a constant reminder that she was chasing answers she did not yet fully understand. The town she left behind had grown smaller in the morning sun, the outlines of familiar buildings fading into the shimmer of heat on the horizon. She thought of him constantly, of the way he had spoken her name in whispers, and how those whispers had carried both care and distance. The thought gnawed at her, making her wonder if she had ever truly known the man she had agreed to share a life with. Her mind wandered back to the wedding day, the way the neighbors had smiled politely, nodding as if they had already known how the night would end. Small towns carry knowledge like seeds carried on the wind, planting gossip wherever it can take root. She recalled how the preacher had spoken of duty and love, and how the old women had clutched their shawls, muttering under their breath about how some hearts are not easily tamed. Tala had laughed quietly to herself then, thinking of her own strength, her own ability to endure. Now the laughter felt hollow, a memory of confidence that had been tested almost immediately. As the horse carried her forward, Tala considered the life he must have left behind. He had always been private, careful to speak little of his family or past connections. Sometimes, in the evenings before their wedding, he would sit by the fire and stare at the shadows as if they held answers he could not speak aloud. Tala had asked gently, and he would deflect, turning the conversation elsewhere with a quiet chuckle or a small nod. Now she wondered if those silences had been warnings, subtle hints of a burden he could not share. She did not know if it was a debt, a secret, or a danger, but the absence of clarity made her imagination stretch across all possibilities. The road wound past fields that had yet to be plowed, through thickets of scrub and wildflowers that bent under the breeze. Tala noticed small details that had once been comforting: the tracks of a rabbit, the call of a hawk circling above, but now they felt like distractions, small distractions in the urgency of a heart pressed by unanswered questions. She had always been observant, the child of a land that demanded awareness, yet the deeper she thought, the more she realized she was unprepared for a mystery carried not by nature, but by the man she had married. Meanwhile, back at the house, neighbors had begun to notice the absence of her new husband. Whispers traveled along the fences, carrying speculation with every repetition. Some said he had left town for business, others suspected something darker, a reckoning from the past that he could not face openly. Tala's absence, though temporary in hours, amplified the tension, and the town's curiosity began to feel like pressure. She felt the weight of judgment even before her feet returned to familiar ground. The combination of her concern and their silent scrutiny made her question every step, every decision, even as she pressed forward toward the unknown. Her thoughts also turned to the people she had left behind in her own life. Her mother's words echoed with clarity: "He will show who he is not in comfort, but in absence." Watch and listen, Tala, watch and listen. Tala remembered the cautious tone, the way her mother had spoken as if foreseeing trouble. Those words now felt like a guide, a map through shadows she did not yet understand. Perhaps she had been too trusting, or perhaps the man she married had a reason that could explain everything. The tension lay in the unknown, in the threads of past and present woven together so tightly that pulling one risked unraveling all. Hours passed and the sun climbed higher, beating down on the trail and drying the sweat on her brow. She stopped near a creek to let the horse drink, crouching beside it and letting the cool water reflect the sky. Tala's reflection stared back at her, serious and uncertain. She studied the lines of her own face, the weariness in her eyes, and wondered how much she could endure before the truth revealed itself. The whispers of the night before mingled with the breeze, carrying fragments of unanswered questions that seemed to settle in her bones. Tala considered the possibility that he had not meant to leave her at all. Perhaps circumstances beyond their control had pulled him away. Perhaps danger, old debts, or unresolved family matters had made him act with sudden necessity. She wanted to believe that, but the way he had spoken, so deliberate, so gentle in tone yet distant in intention, left a sting that reason could not fully soothe. It was that sting that compelled her to continue, to search for context, to uncover the layers hidden beneath polite words and quiet gestures. As she rode on, her mind traced back to the people who had intersected with his life. The men in the town who nodded at him with unspoken acknowledgement, the women who whispered warnings, the older figures who watched from porches with cautious eyes. They all carried fragments of his past that she could not yet interpret. Tala knew that each person's memory held pieces of a story, and piecing them together would require patience and courage. She resolved to learn what she could without alerting him to her pursuit too soon, fearing that confrontation without understanding might only push him further away. The afternoon sun began to dip low, stretching shadows across the land and sharpening the contrast between light and dark. Tala found herself at the edge of a small settlement she had never visited, a cluster of buildings and barns that bore the signs of age and labor. Smoke rose from a chimney, and children's laughter echoed faintly from somewhere beyond sight. She tied the horse and moved quietly toward a general store, hoping to gather information without revealing her urgency. Her appearance alone, a bride in simple traveling clothes, drew the curiosity of the few patrons, but she spoke with calm, measured words, asking about his comings and goings, the people he might have visited, and the stories that floated along these roads. Each answer she received added both clarity and confusion. Some spoke warmly of a man who had helped neighbors with heavy work, who had been trusted with tools and livestock, yet the undercurrent of caution in their tones suggested a past that had not fully faded. Others avoided her gaze, shrugging or offering vague statements that hinted at secrets better left unspoken. Tala listened, absorbing details, piecing together the shadow of a life that had existed parallel to her own, and realizing that she had married a man whose history was both admirable and heavy with mystery. As evening approached, Tala returned to the creek, letting the last light fall across her face and the water at her feet. She thought about the day's discoveries, the fragments of conversations, the pieces of a puzzle that only grew more complex. Each answer led to another question, each story to another shadow. The tension she carried in her chest tightened, and yet beneath it a determination grew stronger. She would find him. She would understand. The first night of marriage had ended with absence, but Tala now understood that it was only the beginning. Night fell slowly, a deep blue over the plains, and Tala made camp near the creek. The fire crackled softly, and the horse grazed nearby. She wrapped herself in her shawl, thinking of the bed she had left behind, the empty room, the lamp still flickering in memory. She imagined him somewhere, also thinking of her, perhaps burdened by obligations, perhaps haunted by unspoken truths. The distance between them, physical and emotional, seemed to stretch endlessly, and Tala felt the weight of every whisper, every unanswered question. She lay back, gazing at the stars, tracing constellations her mother had taught her to name. The land seemed quiet, yet it was alive with hidden movements, unseen paths, and stories that intersected with her own. She wondered how many people carried secrets like the ones she suspected he bore, and how much courage it took to return, to confront the past and reconcile it with the present. Her mind circled endlessly around one question. Why had he left her the first night of marriage, leaving her with whispers that cut deeper than absence itself? The wind carried the faint sounds of life in the distance, a dog barking, the creak of a barn door, a distant wagon moving along an unpaved road. Each sound reminded her that the world moved forward whether she understood it or not. And she resolved, with quiet ferocity, that she would move with it too, following the trail, gathering the pieces, and waiting for the moment when the truths he carried would be revealed. The first night had set the stage, but the story was far from over. Every step forward would bring her closer to understanding, and every shadow she passed through would test her patience, her courage, and her heart. As the fire dwindled, Tala remained alert, listening to the night. Her journey was only beginning, and with it came the promise of answers and the danger of revelations. Somewhere ahead lay the truths that would explain his absence, the whispers that had unsettled her and the secrets that had shaped the man she had married. And as she drifted toward a restless sleep, the stars above seemed to hold their breath, waiting for the story to unfold. Tala woke before the first light touched the horizon, the chill of dawn pressing against her skin as she unrolled the blanket that had been her only comfort through the night. Her horse nickered softly, pawing at the ground as if aware that the day ahead would demand everything she could give. She rose carefully, shaking off the stiffness in her limbs, and scanned the landscape. The road stretched ahead, winding through low hills and open plains, each turn promising answers and threats in equal measure. Her heart beat faster, not with fear alone, but with a mix of anticipation and determination. The first night of marriage, with its whispered absence, had left her unsteady, but now she carried the weight of purpose alongside the ache of uncertainty. The sun began to rise, pale gold spilling over the land, catching the dust in the air and turning it into a shimmering haze. Tala adjusted her cloak against the morning wind and set her horse into a steady trot. Her thoughts circled the man she sought, the husband whose absence had carved hollows into her heart. She tried to imagine his day, the choices he had made, and the reasons that could have pulled him from her side so suddenly. Each possibility teased her mind, some hopeful, some frightening. He had been cautious and deliberate in everything, and she now understood that his silence was not mere indifference but a shield that she had to find a way past, no matter how careful she needed to be. Hours passed with only the sound of hooves and wind. The road led her past familiar landmarks, the edges of forests and the remains of abandoned homesteads, each place whispering stories of past lives and lost hopes. Tala's attention to detail, honed through years of observation, kept her aware of every sound and movement. The creek where she had rested yesterday shimmered in her memory, a reminder that water carries truths if one listens closely. She paused at the edge of a small bridge, the wood groaning under the horse's weight, and looked down at the water swirling below. Reflection stared back, steady and serious, and Tala felt the echo of every unanswered question pressing in. Somewhere behind her, the town she had left still held its quiet judgment. She imagined the neighbors watching, speculating, waiting for news. She did not care for their curiosity. Her focus remained fixed on him, on the man who had whispered and left, leaving her with more questions than comfort. There was something in his past, something he had not shared, that had kept him away. It was not cruelty, she felt, but caution, necessity, and perhaps fear. The tension of not knowing clawed at her, but Tala drew it into herself, turning it into resolve. She would not rest until she understood, until the silence was broken. By mid-morning, she reached the outskirts of another settlement, a place she had passed only in whispers on the road. The general store stood quiet, save for the bell above the door that jingled when she entered. She moved with quiet purpose, scanning faces for recognition, listening for the slightest mention of him. Conversations carried on in low tones, eyes flicking toward her briefly before returning to their tasks. Tala asked subtle questions, careful not to betray her urgency. Each piece of information she gathered, an errand he had run, a man he had met, a location he had visited, added threads to the tapestry of his absence. The pattern was still unclear, but the threads existed, waiting for her to trace them. As the sun climbed high, the air thickened with heat and tension. Tala found herself at a crossroads, a place where multiple paths led deeper into unknown territory. She tied her horse and walked a short distance to a bench under a lone oak, shading herself from the blazing sky. The wind stirred the leaves with soft rustling, carrying whispers that seemed almost human. Tala's mind circled possibilities. Perhaps he had gone to settle an old debt or confront someone who had threatened his past. Perhaps he carried letters, messages, or secrets that demanded immediate attention. Each thought sharpened her senses, made her step lighter, her heart heavier with anticipation. By late afternoon, she encountered signs that someone had passed here recently. Footprints, disturbed dust, a broken branch, each small detail spoke volumes to Tala's trained eyes. She followed the trail, alert to every movement and sound, feeling the land itself conspiring with her search. The air shifted, carrying scents unfamiliar but meaningful, smoke from a distant fire, the faint tang of leather, horses nearby. Her pulse quickened, a mixture of fear and hope keeping her moving faster, despite the growing weariness in her limbs. As evening approached, Tala spotted a small cabin nestled among thick trees. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney, curling into the darkening sky. She dismounted and approached cautiously, noting the marks of recent activity around the door. Someone was home and the place carried an air of quiet secrecy. Tala's instincts told her this was significant, perhaps a clue to the reasons for his sudden departure. She lingered just out of sight, considering how to make her presence known without startling or driving him further away. The suspense coiled tightly in her chest, each moment heavy with expectation. Inside the cabin, faint sounds reached her, someone moving, low voices, a rhythm of life she did not fully recognize. Tala crouched behind a tree, listening carefully. She could hear the shuffle of boots, the creak of a chair, the soft murmur of a voice that could be his. Her heart leapt with a mix of hope and anxiety. She wanted answers, yes, but feared them as well. What if the truths she uncovered were not what she wished to find? What if the whispers she had felt the first night were only the beginning of burdens too heavy for her to bear alone? Night fell fully as Tala continued to watch the cabin. Shadows stretched long and dark, and the firelight flickered through the window, casting shapes that seemed alive with secrets. She considered her options, weighing patience against action. To confront him now might reveal truths, but it could also drive him away. To wait risked missing an opportunity to understand the forces that had pulled him from her side. The suspense was nearly unbearable, and Tala felt the tension tighten like a cord around her chest, pulling her forward toward inevitable confrontation. Her thoughts wandered to the vows she had spoken, the promises that had meant safety and belonging. Now those words felt fragile, delicate as a spider's web against wind. The first night of marriage had ended with absence and whispers, and each step since had only deepened the mystery. Tala realized she could not turn back, not now, not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. Every instinct she had learned from her childhood, from the land and its harsh demands, urged her to move forward, to confront, to demand clarity. Suddenly, a noise from behind the cabin made her freeze. The sound of footsteps, deliberate and cautious, approached the front door. Tala's pulse thundered, her mind racing with possibilities. Was it him returning to face her, or someone else, a threat from the past that had drawn him away? The suspense wrapped tightly around her, each moment stretching out, unbearable and electric. She crouched lower, heart hammering in her chest, every sense straining for detail. A shadow appeared at the cabin door, tall and familiar. Tala's breath caught, recognizing the line of his shoulders, the movement of his hand as he paused. The tension that had grown over days, the uncertainty and worry, all condensed into this one moment. She wanted to call out, to run toward him, to demand answers, but something held her back. The suspense, the unknown, had grown into a delicate, unbearable thread that could snap with the slightest misstep. She stayed still, waiting, every nerve alert, every heartbeat echoing the question that had haunted her. Why had he left her the first night? Why had whispers pierced her more than absence itself? Inside the cabin, the door creaked slightly and the shadow moved with deliberate care. Tala's eyes followed, searching for signs, for recognition, for the answers that had eluded her for so long. Each motion he made, each breath, each subtle gesture, carried weight she could feel even from a distance. The tension between them stretched invisible across the yard, thick and palpable. The night deepened, and with it the suspense grew to a nearly unbearable level. Tala's chest tightened, her mind spinning with possibilities, each one more urgent than the last. The firelight flickered again, casting long, shifting shadows across the cabin walls. Tala took a careful step forward, then another, feeling the earth beneath her boots, the promise of confrontation so near she could almost taste it. She was close to answers, close to the moment that would reveal the truths behind the whispers, the absence and the heavy silence of the first night. Yet even as hope surged within her, the uncertainty remained, the tension at its peak, every moment a delicate balance between revelation and danger. Tala paused, just a few feet from the cabin now, listening to the sounds of life inside. Every whisper, every movement, every faint echo of a voice intensified her anticipation. The climax was near, she could feel it in the way the air pressed against her, in the way the shadows clung to the trees, in the way her own heart refused to slow. Every unanswered question, every thread of doubt, every fragment of his past she had uncovered, all converged in this moment. She took a deep breath, steadying herself, ready for the confrontation that would change everything, yet knowing the resolution had not come, that the suspense still hung, thick and electric, ready to explode. The stars above glimmered faintly through the branches, silent witnesses to a story about to reach its turning point. Tala's hand hovered over the door latch, the final step between uncertainty and the truth. The tension was unbearable, the suspense absolute, and the night seemed to hold its breath alongside her. The answers she sought, the closure she longed for, were just within reach, but still hidden behind walls of fear, secrecy, and unspoken truths. The story was on the edge, poised for revelation, yet the moment remained suspended, a delicate balance of hope, dread, and anticipation that promised everything and nothing at once. Tala's hand rested on the cabin door, the cold iron cool beneath her fingers, and she finally let herself take a deep, steadying breath. The tension that had wrapped around her chest for days seemed almost unbearable, yet the moment of truth was finally here. She pushed the door gently, stepping inside with the caution of someone who had learned the land's lessons well. The room was small, warm with the lingering scent of smoke and wood, and the fire in the hearth cast flickering light across his face. He looked up, startled, but relief washed over him the moment he recognized her. Tala's heart thumped in her chest. Every step she had taken, every day of uncertainty, leading to this very instant. He rose slowly, hands open in a gesture of surrender and apology. His eyes, usually calm and measured, were bright with unspoken emotion. "Tala," he said, his voice catching. "I meant to explain. I should have told you." He paused, struggling for words that could capture the weight of the past few days. Tala stayed still, listening, allowing him space to speak, though the questions she had carried for so long demanded answers. He explained then carefully, as if weighing every word. There had been matters from his family, old debts and responsibilities that required immediate attention. He had feared leaving her in uncertainty, feared that telling her too soon might put her in danger or cause unnecessary worry. His absence had been driven not by neglect, but by a need to protect her, by a careful consideration of consequences she could not yet see. Tala listened, her heart softening as the pieces fell into place. The whispers from that first night, the distance, the sudden departure, it all had purpose, a shield rather than a blade. As he spoke, Tala understood the layers of tension she had felt, the silent burdens he had carried alone. His life had intersected with others in ways she had not known, obligations and loyalties that had shaped his every move. The subplots of his past, the men he had helped, the debts he had repaid, the promises he had kept in silence now illuminated the reasons behind his actions. The man she had married was not perfect, but he was steadfast, honorable, and deeply committed to her safety and well-being. The revelation brought clarity, washing away the shadows of doubt that had clung to her heart for so long. Tala stepped closer, her hand reaching for his. He met her halfway, and the touch that had been missing since their wedding felt like the closing of a long, difficult journey. The warmth of connection, the understanding that had eluded her for days, now filled the space between them. They spoke quietly then, words exchanged slowly, carefully, building trust where uncertainty had once lingered. Each explanation, each admission deepened their bond, and Tala felt the fragile promise of their marriage strengthened by the trials they had endured. Outside, the night had fallen fully, yet inside the cabin, light and warmth created a sense of home. Tala realized that absence and whispers had been a test not of love, but of patience, understanding, and resilience. The suspense, the tension, the unanswered questions all had led to this moment of connection and comprehension. She saw that love, in its truest form, required endurance, the courage to face shadows, and the willingness to trust even when clarity was not immediate. They spoke long into the night, sharing stories of their past, filling in the gaps left by years of guarded silence. Tala recounted her journey to find him, the observations she had made, the moments of fear and hope that had driven her forward. He listened with quiet admiration, acknowledging the strength she had shown, the courage required to face uncertainty and act with intention. In that exchange, both found respect, understanding, and the beginnings of forgiveness, not for wrongdoing, but for the misunderstandings that life and circumstance had created. The tension that had dominated their early days together dissolved slowly, replaced by warmth, laughter, and quiet relief. Tala noticed the small gestures, the way he offered her a seat by the fire, the care with which he poured her a cup of tea, the way he kept his distance respectful yet attentive. She realized that the first night, while painful in memory, had been a doorway to this deeper understanding, a test of patience, an opening to the honesty that would define their marriage. They moved to settle in, preparing a simple meal together and sharing the work of the cabin. Each task, from chopping wood to lighting the hearth, became an exercise in cooperation and intimacy. Tala found joy in these small moments, realizing that love was not only found in words and vows, but in shared effort, trust, and the quiet rhythm of life together. He, in turn, showed a tenderness that had been hidden beneath the careful exterior, the strength of a man who had carried burdens silently and now could share them safely. The night stretched on, and Tala lay beside him for the first time with full understanding, her fears replaced by clarity and trust. She reflected on the journey that had brought them here, the uncertainty, the suspense, the search through towns and trails, the silent fears and whispered questions. Each step, each moment of tension had led to a greater understanding of not only him but herself. She had discovered patience, courage, and the power of seeking truth before judgment. By dawn they stepped outside together, the world bathed in early sunlight that promised a new beginning. The land no longer seemed harsh or empty. It felt alive, a witness to their story and a partner in the life they would build. Tala felt the thrill of anticipation replaced by steady hope, a recognition that while challenges might arise, they had faced uncertainty together and emerged stronger. The fields, the winds, the distant hills all seemed ready to welcome them into a shared life defined by understanding and trust. They rode back toward the town slowly, hand in hand, the tension of previous days lingering only as a memory. Neighbors paused in curiosity, but this time Tala did not feel scrutiny. Instead, she felt pride in the journey she had undertaken, the courage she had shown, and the connection she had nurtured. The subplots of doubt, absence, and whispers had resolved not through conflict alone, but through patient seeking of truth, through dialogue, through willingness to see beyond the surface. As the cabin and the trails behind them faded into memory, Tala reflected on the lessons she carried forward. Love required more than words. It required action, understanding, and sometimes the courage to confront silence. The first night had been a crucible, a test of patience and faith, and the resolution had not erased the tension, but transformed it into something meaningful. She understood that absence could teach, whispers could warn, and every trial could strengthen a bond when faced with honesty and courage. He rode beside her, quiet but present, a man reshaped in her eyes by truth and revelation. The bond they shared now carried depth, resilience, and warmth that neither had fully appreciated before. Tala knew that their marriage, like the land around them, would demand care, observation, and steady effort. But she also knew that the foundation had been laid, tested in tension, solidified in understanding, and strengthened by trust. The sun rose fully, spilling light across the fields, and Tala felt a sense of completion mingled with anticipation for the life ahead. The unanswered questions that had haunted her first night were no longer shadows, but stepping stones toward clarity and intimacy. The suspense had fulfilled its purpose, and what remained was action, choice, and shared effort, a life built together, anchored in patience, honesty, and respect. She looked at him and he looked back, both carrying the unspoken acknowledgment that the journey had been difficult but necessary. The first night, with its absence and whispers, was no longer a wound but a lesson, and the tension of days past had transformed into a quiet strength between them. Tala realized that sometimes the hardest beginnings lead to the most enduring happiness, that understanding comes after patience, and that love flourishes when truth is shared and burdens are carried together. As they approached the town, the townspeople paused again, but this time Tala smiled and held his hand confidently. The world was the same, yet their perspective had changed. The subplots of suspicion, doubt, and mystery had been resolved in private, leaving them stronger and closer. Every step forward now carried intention, every glance and gesture meaning, and every whisper remembered as a lesson rather than a wound. By evening, back at the cabin, they settled into the rhythm of their life together. Work was shared, conversations flowed freely, and the shadows of the past lingered only as guides for patience and understanding. Tala lay beside him that night, feeling the steady rise and fall of his chest, the warmth of a man who had returned to share life fully and openly. The first night was no longer a memory of absence, but the turning point toward trust and love. In that quiet golden moment, Tala understood the truth of her mother's words. Marriage was a doorway, a test, and a promise. It demanded endurance, curiosity, and courage. She had faced uncertainty and emerged stronger, and in doing so had discovered the depth of her own heart and the steadiness of his. The journey had begun with whispers and absence, but it now led to presence, understanding, and the quiet joy of shared life. The stars rose over the plains once more, peaceful witnesses to a story resolved not with drama alone, but with patience, clarity, and human understanding. Tala and her husband sat together outside the cabin, watching the fire flicker, the night hum softly, and the world carry on. The suspense that had driven them, the tension that had tested them, all had transformed into something enduring, love built on trust, courage, and the wisdom of facing the unknown together. Their hands met, and in that simple touch lay the promise of all the days to come. The story, once heavy with unanswered questions and whispered absence, ended not with pain but with understanding, not with fear but with hope, and not with uncertainty but with the satisfaction of truth revealed. Tala had faced the first night, the journey, and the suspense of doubt, and now stood at the threshold of a life full of love, resilience, and shared strength, ready to step forward into the promise of tomorrow.